Beacon Press Audio presents What We Build with Power, The Fight for Economic Justice in Tech by David Delmar Sentíes. This audiobook is narrated by Alex Mitz. Published by Beacon Press Audio 2019. Introduction. In 1815, history's most celebrated military playbook was written by a soldier reeling from defeat. Karl von Clausewitz had been among the Prussian men captured by Napoleon's forces following a humiliating invasion, after which he spent a year in captivity. It's believed that his time spent ruminating on that loss, playing and replaying different scenarios in his head, inspired his magnum opus. I am convinced that At War could only have been written from a place of frustration. It's frustration, rather than victory, that offers the greatest wisdom. I'm no Clausewitz, and this is no magnum opus, but it is a howl of frustration. I write these lines a few hours after having told a group of our students that pride is a complicated feeling. I was pumping them up for our demo day, at which they'll be presenting their capstone projects to an assembly of prospective employers. They're all talented young adults of color who have no background in tech, but who have spent the last 5 months grinding their way through a nearly impossible boot camp to become better software engineers. They were frustrated with their own projects because they weren't perfect. They were nervous, which I believe is a symptom of love. You don't get nervous when you don't care. They were anxious to get off the call with me and get back to work, debugging and reworking. These are all manifestations of the pride we take in our work. I'm the founder of this boot camp, and I'm immensely proud of it. In other words, I have an unholy mess of feelings about it. I spend just about all of my waking hours ruminating about what has worked, what hasn't, and what would need to change about the entire industry for us to be able to even approach the impact we set out to make. We cannot, by ourselves, execute our own mission to advance economic resilience in Black and Brown communities. Think about that for a second. We spend all of our time fighting for something we fundamentally cannot accomplish alone. In a sense, it means that we operate in a perpetual state of losing. We score some wins along the way, but we're losing, and we are proud. Resilient Coders is a highly competitive coding bootcamp that exists for the express purpose of building economic resilience in communities of color. Everything we do is meant to serve this purpose. We're unapologetic, for example, about the inclusion of race in our mandate. We work with people of color, and about 90% of those people of color self-identify as Black or Latinx. All of our students live in economically precarious circumstances. Few of them have had the opportunity to graduate from college. We don't charge our students a dime, not before, during, or after the program. In fact, we pay them to learn in order to offset the privilege of time enjoyed by other candidates for software engineering jobs. We staff up to support our students, maintaining a low student-to-instructor ratio and a dedicated non-technical support team. We have a sales team that brings employers to the table in order to try to propel our alumni over the barricades. Our pedagogy is rigorously human-centric. It's based on Brazilian educator Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, which is to say that we subscribe to a model of education that is based on exploration among peers rather than the more traditional banking of facts. We conduct no standardized tests before, during, or at the end of the program since they skew heavily white and male. We place our students exclusively into full-time jobs as software engineers with competitive salaries. We charge our employers a placement fee because we fundamentally believe that the expense of workforce training must be assumed by entities other than the student if we're ever going to see a change in the industry. Maybe the most important note to make about the program is that most of the decisions we've made in pursuit of our vision of a rigorously worker-centric approach to workforce training have jeopardized, at some point and at some level, our ability to grow or even maintain the business. We made them anyway. All of this is anti-systemic. We've done it so far in that Resilient Coders is alive and well, but it works by sheer force of will most of the time, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. Just as this book was born of frustration, so was the organization. There are too few Latinxes in tech, and even among our small subset, most of us who have made it into good, high-paying jobs tend to be white Latinxes like me. I've been lucky in many ways. Most Latinxes in this country, especially those with African or indigenous roots, live in a state of economic oppression, which was violently cultivated over centuries for the development of American industry. One of my frustrations with tech was, and remains, the tendency to decouple underrepresentation from a legacy of intentional economic oppression that persists today. In 2014, I started by spending my vacation days from my job at PayPal volunteering at a youth detention center, teaching young men the fundamentals of web development on laptops without internet access. The head of education at the facility asked me what we should call my class. I didn't really know or care. I suggested we call it Coding 101. She laughed at me. "Literally no one will attend that class," she said. "You need to give it a name that simultaneously says what the class is and also allows the boys to see themselves in it." Thus, the name Resilient Coders was spoken into existence over the phone. Eventually, I was able to pull together a couple of grants that allowed me to quit my job and start experimenting with a business model. 7 years later, as I write this, we haven't stopped experimenting. Resilient Coders has been at least 6 different organizations so far, and hopefully will become many more in the future. Each one of those pivots has been precipitated by the one question that sets us apart from other nonprofit workforce development programs. It's a short question, but a complicated one. It's our team's greatest source of strife, turbulence, and motivation. It's our heart and soul. It's our persistent challenge, our greatest strength, and every mundane thought or reflection in between. In a word, it's our pride. How do we best show up for our students and their communities? We challenge ourselves. We pivot. We rebuild something that's closer to our values, always pressing up against our financial capacity. The reality is that we make no money by hiring more support staff or by extending our stipends. With every advancement we make comes a second important question. Is this actually sustainable? Because becoming better at what you do in the nonprofit world doesn't necessarily mean an increase in revenue. Fortunately for us, we've been able to continue growing as a business while we've improved the programming. We've gotten very good at being a coding bootcamp. Typically, between 85 and 90% of our graduates go on to find jobs as full-time software engineers, with salaries averaging in the 90s. But then this brings us to a third important question. The whole point of the bootcamp is to build economic resilience in communities of color. I started this organization as a vehicle through which to fight for economic justice. To what degree is it actually working? It works very well at a relatively small scale. We're great at training people for jobs as software engineers and putting them into jobs at companies where hiring managers are interested in entertaining a conversation with an organization like Resilient Coders. There's not much we can do about the alum's experience on the job other than to advocate to our point of contact, whose power to intervene in instances of poor or unjust management is usually limited. Skills training providers like us live with a certain cognitive dissonance. We know that it's too often the case for people of color that landing and keeping a job is not just about the skills. It's about the barriers they face in entering the workforce at a level that is commensurate with those same skills. The libertarian dream that education transcends race is demonstrably untrue, as we'll unpack in these pages. On one level is the explicit and overt racism that our alumni experience at their jobs. We used to keep a list titled "Racist Shit Employers Do," which we would discuss with our company contacts. Sometimes they acted on what we told them, but mostly they didn't. Some people got fired, but in our experience, fewer people lose their jobs at the trigger end of racism than at the barrel end. What do we do as a skills training provider considering the cultural context? What's our role? The one thing we are structurally designed to do is to train, so we do. We meet with our alum. We play whatever role the students need us to play in making them even stronger programmers. Sometimes we're running drills. Often we're just cheering them on and encouraging them to get back out there and submit their resumes to companies that are probably going to exclude them as strenuously as the ones they just left. Endure it is our implicit message. The pay is good. This complicates our relationship with our most important goal, to show up in meaningful ways for our students and their communities. Can we really do no better than get back out there? The pandemic struck before we could focus our efforts on answering that question. Resilient Coders survived 2020 by the sheer force of will of our staff, our students, our alumni, our board, and a much bigger army of allies than I'd realized we had. Our champions showed up out of nowhere. Advocates were pushing their companies to hire from the program despite layoffs and hiring freezes. It worked. Our 2020 graduates found jobs. It was during this year of uprisings that we discovered a burgeoning subculture in tech. People were ready to mobilize. They'd been out in the streets in June, and they were bringing the protest with them into the workplace. It seemed like a turning point in a conversation about race and tech that had been languishing for years in a quagmire of performative gestures, statements, and LinkedIn posts. Momentum was building. We were determined to leverage it into a broader transformation of tech culture. It would start with a transformation of resilient coders, another pivot.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?